My name is Maura Policelli. I'm the Executive Director of the University of Notre Dame's Keough School of Global Affairs, Washington, D.C. office. I'm pleased to be hosting today's discussion, Promoting Human Flourishing in Central America. For those of you who may not be familiar with Notre Dame's Keough School, we are a graduate program which addresses global poverty and inequality through policy, practice, and partnerships. Our mission is to promote human dignity and seek ways to empower the world's poorest and most vulnerable populations to flourish. Our mission also includes including differing perspectives and encouraging civil discourse on global policy topics such as migration. There are several different ways to address migration that are often cited, some shorter term to respond to present circumstances, often emergency circumstances, so things like border security and enforcement, protections for vulnerable individuals through asylum and refugee systems. There are also medium-term solutions such as temporary visas, and we recognize the importance and role of all of these. Today's discussion is primarily focused on the development pathway, the longer-term solutions, partly because this is the area of research that our Pulte Institute has been focusing on. We recognize that human development is the only long-term sustainable solution to migration in the region. So we have a fantastic agenda today, so let's get started. We have a two-part program which begins first with our distinguished guest, Congressman Michael McCaul. We're thrilled to have him with us. He'll be interviewed by one of our Global Affairs Master students, Clara Villatoro. We will then move to a panel discussion featuring the research of our Pulte Institute on Global Affairs on potential ways that international cooperation, particularly US policy, could improve the lives in Central America. We have two prominent policy experts, Ms. Katherine Dueholm, Acting Deputy Assistant Secretary for Central American and Mexican Affairs at the US State Department, and Dan Rundy, Senior Vice President Senior Vice President at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, who will offer their comments on the research and recommendations before we close. I will be incorporating questions and comments submitted by many of you when you're registered for this event. So to launch, I'll turn things over to Ray Offenheiser. He's the William J. Pulte Director of the Keough School's Pulte Institute for Global Development. He will be introducing Congressman McCaul and Ms. Villatoro. Ray is no stranger to the challenges and opportunities in Central America, given his extensive career in international development and his work in the region. He was president of Oxfam America for over 20 years, and before that, directed programs in Latin America for the Ford Foundation, Inter-American Foundation, and Save the Children Federation. Ray, over to you.
Thanks, Maura. As part of the Keough School, the Pulte Institute, which I direct, designs, implements, monitors, and evaluates development projects sponsored by the United States government and other US institutions. Today's event is a part of a series of dialogues on the realities facing Central Americans that we've held both in Central America and in Washington, D.C. over the last several years. In these dialogues, we've explored well-known root causes of migration in the region, such as violence, poverty, poor governance, and climate change. Along with many of you, we have a profound understanding of why people are leaving the region. And we welcome efforts by Vice President Kamala Harris and other policymakers to fully understand these reasons. But together with our partners in the region, many of whom are with us today on this Zoom call, our inquiry has another dimension. We are asking a very simple question. What can be done to help people in the region build lives of dignity that ensure that they can stay in the region? Through our national surveys, data-driven research, and growing evidence on aid effectiveness in Central America, we see how civil society organizations, universities, and everyday Central Americans are promoting ways for their communities to remain and to flourish at home in the region. Expect to see more from us on this topic in the near future as we continue to expand our work and our partnerships throughout the region. Now let me introduce our distinguished guest, Congressman Michael McCaul. Congressman Michael T. McCaul is currently serving his 8th term representing Texas' 10th District in the United States House of Representatives. He has served as chairman of the House Homeland Security Committee and is currently the ranking member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Congressman McCaul is joined by one of our Keough School's exceptional graduate students, Clara Villatoro. Clara is a former journalist from El Salvador who covered breaking news in Central America on topics from public health to environment to economics for both local and international news outlets. During the past 4 years, she served as the Central America Regional Human Rights and Democracy Program Coordinator for the Pulte Institute. Congressman McCaul, I'll hand things off to you for your opening remarks, and afterwards, Clara will ask you a few follow-up questions. Welcome, Congressman McCaul.
Oh, thank you so much for that introduction, and it's an honor to speak to the Keough School of Global Affairs. Thanks for having me talk today about the underlying factors that cause the surge of migration from Central America and really how best to address them. This topic is incredibly timely as the United States is once again facing a surge of migrants at our southern border. I've dealt with this issue for almost my entire career, both as a federal prosecutor in the Western District of Texas, and then later as the chairman of the Homeland Security Committee for 6 years, and then now as a lead Republican on the Foreign Affairs Committee. I recently visited the Rio Grande Valley sector, which I'm sure many of you know is one of the most active and busiest sectors at our southern border. It was, in my judgment, the worst I've ever seen it. A true humanitarian crisis. Children without parents, crowded into facilities are over 100% over their capacity, 10% of them having COVID. I saw one little girl that really struck out to me. She was only 5 years old. She was all alone. She was in tears. She didn't have her family with her, and it was heartbreaking. And what's worse, in my judgment, is I think it could have been prevented. I think the Biden administration's messaging on immigration and their decision to rescind successful asylum agreements with Central American countries, as well as the Migration Protection Program, otherwise known as Remain in Mexico policy, has had a direct cause and effect on this crisis. And you don't need to listen to me. That's what the Border Patrol will tell you down at the border. When I was at the RGV sector, I spoke with the Border Patrol sector chief, and usually they're very guarded in their remarks. But he told me this was not a seasonal phenomenon, as many say, that there was a direct cause and effect from the rescission of certain policies from the previous administration, specifically the Remain in Mexico policy and the asylum agreements with Central American countries. Negotiating these successful agreements was an historic foreign policy achievement, and rescinding them, I think, has been a massive foreign policy blunder. Time really is of the essence for Congress and the administration to work together with our allies and partners in Central America to find new policies to tackle this migrant crisis. That starts with tackling the root causes of migration, the lack of economic opportunity, poor governance, and rampant corruption, high crime rates, and the violence caused by drug cartels. These challenges can be addressed by combining effective immigration policies with robust foreign assistance funding. One of the most effective tools we have for addressing the root causes of migration is through targeted foreign assistance. But sending $4 billion to Central America with no strings attached, as some have called for, will not help the situation unless the funding is combined with a clear strategy. I've been a staunch supporter of continued foreign assistance funding to the region, but we have to prioritize quality in our programming and evaluate what is working and what is not. And that's why former Chairman Elliot Engel and I put together the United States Northern Triangle Enhanced Engagement Act in 2019. I'm pleased to say this bill was incorporated into the 2020 Omnibus and signed into law in January. This new law requires the State Department and USAID to submit a 5-year strategy to address the root drivers of migration. In other words, it requires the administration to develop a clear plan on what is needed and how best to accomplish those goals. As the migrant crisis only gets worse, now more than ever, we need the Biden administration to submit their 5-year strategy so we can begin to tackle this crisis and this problem. So again, I want to thank University of Notre Dame, go Irish. I happen to be an Irish Catholic, and the Keough School of Global Affairs, and its Pulte Institute for Global Development for inviting me to speak here today and to hold this very important discussion. The people of Central America deserve the opportunity to live their lives and raise their families in secure and stable conditions. Prioritizing our neighbors in Central America is key to America's success in the Western Hemisphere. So thanks so much for having me.
Thank you, Congressman McCaul, for your remarks, including your views on contrasting immigration policies of the Trump and Biden administrations. Your perspective is valuable, and your past and current support for the region is admirable, and I appreciate that. Having grown up in El Salvador, also, I had to say that I do differ from your assessment of the asylum cooperative agreement of the Trump administration. Just to clarify, I think that could be a topic for an entire webinar itself. And I don't think it is responsible to ask countries in vulnerable conditions that are doing solely to help their own people state to also be responsible for third-party refugees. In fact, our partners in the region in Research Notre Dame Commission have identified this as a serious threat for basic human rights during the pandemic. Asylum seekers found themselves stranded in Honduras, for example, with no protection or support and under a very strict lockdown. So again, just to mention an example related to that topic, but however, I do agree with you when you mentioned that any new funding to Central America needs to be spent strategically, and the policies from the US to Central America have an impact in people's lives. That is the main focus of today's discussion, which will feature a research initiative myself and others have been conducting in the region for over 4 years. That said, I would like to go to my first question. You co-authored the United States Northern Triangle and Hate Engagement Act, which became law last year, as you mentioned. Among other things, it requires the Biden administration to submit a strategic plan for the region to Congress by this June. Along with other members, you requested to be delivered this month. Have you seen any progress from the administration on this strategy? Is Congress being consulted? And how do you consider that the Special Envoy Ricardo Zuniga should be involved in creating this strategy? How could the administration and Congress work together?
Well, thank you, Clara, and I've been to your beautiful country of El Salvador and met with your current president, a very charismatic leader, and is a good ally to the United States. And let me say also, I just last week had a dinner with the three, and they don't like it to be called Northern Triangle. I learned they like it to, that's more of a military term. They like it to be called by the countries, and that's El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. But I met with all three ambassadors, and we can talk more about that discussion. They're very concerned about losing a generation of children from their country. And so I think we have this crisis, like any crisis, provides an opportunity, I think, to draw more attention to Central America and the needs and the economic plight. We can talk about asylum. Asylum is a certain standard under law. Fear of persecution based on race or religion. Many of these migrants are moving based on economic and poverty and violence. But to your question with respect to the administration, I had a very timely hour-long discussion yesterday with the special envoy to Central America, or they say Northern Triangle, Mr. Zuniga. And we had a great discussion about the root causes. And I've been talking about root causes for a while. I think a lot of lawmakers, unfortunately, want to look at the border only. I kind of view that as looking at the goal line, when you're on defense and you're on the 1 yard line with the goalpost behind you. We need to be looking at the entire downfield game or football field. We need to look at what causes a parent to hand over their child like the one I talked about. And there were so many of them. What causes them to hand over their child to a trafficker will exploit the child and extort the family for in many cases up to $8,000 a child. It's the biggest human trafficking problem I've seen probably in my lifetime, what's happening right now down there. And to answer that question, it's the economic conditions are so dire. So I think we have an opportunity working as not Republicans, Democrats, but as Americans trying to help our neighbors to the south. And the idea that we talked about, and I think it's a very creative idea. You know, we can talk about the wall and all that stuff, but until we change the economic conditions down there, we're going to continue to have this problem. So there's a State Department mechanism that we authorize into law called the Development Finance Corporation. It's specifically designed to work with private sector companies to provide private investment. When I talked to the investor from Guatemala, he said, you know, foreign assistance is great, but what I want in my country is private investment. I want foreign investment in my country. Now, we will provide that foreign assistance, which I strongly agree that we need. And when the prior administration cut that assistance, Chairman Engel and I restored that vital foreign assistance to Central America, and a lot of it's security, you know, related. So very quickly, the way this I envision working is the Development Finance Corporation, along with the Exim Bank, along with USAID and US Trade, working together in a partnership with private sector interests that can invest more into the region. The Development Finance Corporation takes some of this political risk out of the investment process. As you know, governance, particularly in Honduras, is not very healthy right now. And private investors have concerns about investing where governments are not stable. It's one reason I passed with Lindsey Graham the Global Fragility Act, which was really targeting African nations. But I think there's an opportunity also to do that whole governance approach to Central America as well. So, you know, I'm really, a lot of bills never pass. I am effective because I work across the aisle to get things done. This is one area where I think I see strong bipartisan support to provide something that has been a problem really in my entire lifetime. We have the opportunity to finally address with the momentum that we have now, and I think the bipartisan spirit to get this done, to address the conditions that drive the migration in the first place.
Yeah, probably just taking some of your words, you mentioned that you think that one of the ideal things is that the United States should work for Central America, just like as America, not necessarily parties or separating the administration with Congress. Like I had a question for that because we have seen in Central America that you have different groups going. You have groups from Congress, you have groups from the administrations going and promoting some policies and initiatives. There is any way that you all could work together? Do you think it's possible that, and my question was with that, because you also asked for the Biden plan. So do you think you all could work together and support, as you say, your neighbors in the South?
Well, I mean, the kind of the targeted foreign assistance with the return on investment that appeals to private investment as well, I think is the great bipartisan opportunity here. I don't think, you know, we're going to resolve, you know, the wall, whether that works, whether that's smart, whether technology is better, you know, the asylum agreements. I think that's maybe a non-starter with this administration, but I can tell you the special envoy is particularly pleased to hear from a leading Republican who can work across the aisle and get things done in Congress on this very issue, right? And I think, you know, it's that targeted assistance. We can't just throw money down the drain without having some responsibility and accountability in the funding, particularly with countries like Honduras. We have an election coming up in November, as you know, and 3 of the candidates all have been tagged with some corruption in some form or fashion. Many of the members of the Honduran parliament or Congress have been bought off by cartels. One of the real problems, Clara, is the traffickers themselves. They're not very nice people. The cartels are not nice. They saw this opportunity when these policies were rescinded as a green light that America's open for business again, because people ask, well, why did this happen in just 2 months? With the rescission of these policies, the traffickers saw an opening. They make $15 million a day in this industry. They don't care about these children. I heard stories about them literally turning when Border Patrol would come up to the life rafts, they would actually turn them over so they could get back to the Mexican side, and Border Patrol had to save these drowning children while they diverted drugs in another location and more bad actors and not children. They have this down really as a business, and the cartels are the ones winning right now. We estimated by Border Patrol CBP that they're making about $500 million a month now on this massive human trafficking program that they have. We have to stop it. I've got ideas on the asylum piece, but I think to what we're talking about today is until we address that root cause, you're never going to stop the human tragedy of a parent giving their child over to a human trafficker. And people in the United States don't understand that. I can't imagine one of my 5 kids turning them over to a criminal organization because I'm so desperate and so worried about my child's future. We need to give Central Americans a better future for their children so they stay there. Like the Guatemalan ambassador said, we're losing a generation of our best and our children, and we want to stop that.
I do agree with you. I mean, as Salvadorian, I do agree that we need better chances in Central America and better chances in our own countries. And we at the Pulte Institute, we have been working on trying to analyze all the causes. And as you have mentioned, it's not just one thing. The economic aspect is just one of the aspects, but we have many other aspects that lead to migration. As you mentioned, violence in all the forms, criminal violence, structural violence. We also have even climate change influence migration, but you mentioned governance and accountability, and I wanted to talk about that because the Pulte Institute has a network in Central America as part of our growing Central America Research Alliance. And over the past 4 years, we have been conducting analysis on human rights abuses in Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras. And we conclude that accountability and transparency requirement mechanisms must be attached to foreign assistance, which it has been already there. Is an aspect that has been presented in other administrations as well as a condition for economic issues and human development support. This is also a key component of your Enhanced Engagement Act. How should funding conditions from Congress, such as those in the Enhanced Engagement Act, be coordinated with the Biden administration plans?
Well, and I would direct you to the bipartisan bill that Chairman Engel and I passed, the U.S. Northern Triangle Enhancement Engagement Act. And that's precisely what we were trying to do is, continue the targeted foreign assistance. A lot of the NGOs are doing great work, as you know, down there. And we also, a portion that goes to international law enforcement efforts. In your country, El Salvador, has a major MS-13 problem, but El Salvador did not create MS-13. They were created in the United States of America in Los Angeles, and they were exported to El Salvador. Many people don't realize that. And we worry that a lot of these children coming in will be taken advantage of by MS-13 gangs, for instance. But going back to your question, this act, it requires the administration come up with a plan and a strategy for the funding, and also reporting requirements to the Congress so that we have better oversight of how the money is being spent. Rather than just throwing the money into a rabbit hole, we want that accountability and transparency through America's representatives in Congress and the role that we play on both the funding side with the power of the purse and also our Article 1 constitutional responsibilities of oversight of the executive branch. And I think in a way that was a bit visionary, not anticipating this surge happening right now. The good thing is we have that into law. I look forward to getting your ideas moving forward with this next piece of legislation that I think the administration is going to be very engaged with me and the chairman to move forward on the private investment side too.
Okay, and just to drop off this too, I mean, as a Pulte Institute, we have this network of researchers in Central America, and if we can provide with any information that you need to be very well informed about the situation down in Central America, we're more than happy to provide that support. I just wanted to mention, probably, I don't know how we are with the time, Maura, but we're okay, it's okay?
Yeah, one more question.
Just one more question then. The Keough School, we promote this perspective of integral human development. Is the idea that dignity in every human being is sacred and complex, and protecting that dignity leads to flourishing. And prosperar in Spanish, I will say, is the better translation. The main focus of this activity is under this approach. We're talking about flourishing in Central America and staying in our country with opportunities. In your leadership role on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, what do you say, what U.S. funded programs in Central America have been successful to the point to help locals to flourish from your perspective?
Locals in Central America?
Yeah, I mean, some of the programs that you consider that really kind of were focused on this kind of idea of integral human development that really.
So, when I was in your country's beautiful and great tourism opportunities as well with that industry. Hopefully post pandemic that will begin to pick up. But I really saw firsthand the work that our international law enforcement are doing down there to help protect. But then our NGOs and faith-based organizations that we help fund through our foreign assistance, giving these children an alternative to MS-13, because it is prevalent, like in El Salvador and other countries. We need to give them the proper education. We need to prevent corruption in these countries and promote the security and provide the foreign investment. These NGOs do great work. They were teaching them computer skills, high-tech skills to go into the workforce rather than joining a gang, and that's a much more, you talk about a dignity of human life. That is protecting the sacred life of every human being and their future, which is going to be far better with a job than joining, a gang with, MS-13. And so as a Catholic, it's a moral issue. When I see the children at the detention facilities like at Donna, stacked up one against the other, I mean, it's a horrific thing to see. You can't help but feel your heart breaking as you look at these little children who have no idea where they are, and they don't have their parents with them or their family members. And we treat them very humanely, as we should. We clothe them. She had a little garbage bag with all her life possessions were in that one little bag, plastic bag. And, we find sponsors for them in the United States. Health and Human Services takes proper care, these children. But then long-term, we're going to have a problem in our legal system where we don't want them going into the shadows and underground, as well. So we've got to get this right. And I would love to have your input into this next piece of legislation that I think will be far more important than any border security bill could provide. And that is really getting to the root cause of the poverty there, the violence, the corruption, and how can we fix this once and for all so that these children can live a normal life.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned when these kids arrive to the border, which is a very hard situation. And trust me, as Salvadorian, I know that it's hard. And with migration being a big thing in my family as well, I know what you're talking about. But we also want to focus on all those policies, back then in Central America and how we can help to people flourish back then in Central America. 2 years ago, you object to cuts in the US funded programs that gave at-risk youth an alternative to joining criminal gangs by providing them with technical skills and job training. Do you still consider those types of programs are worthwhile investments?
Yeah, and that's what I was mentioning. Some of the NGOs down there teaching these. I mean, far better to have a child in school than not, and that's true in the United States. Their alternatives are not good, and if we have to give them an alternative to what is a very attractive option where they can make a lot of money and a glamorous life in their view, but then possibly end up not even alive in a couple of years. And so we have to offer them that opportunity. And that's what our foreign assistance really goes to, these trusted NGOs and faith-based operations down there to help give them the technical training and skills that they need to find employment. And that's another issue. That's why the private investment piece is so important, because we can train them for employment, but if there are no employment opportunities, right, then it doesn't work. And so that's why the ambassadors from Honduras and El Salvador and Guatemala were really leaning on me heavily to try to get private investment down there. And I think with this development finance corporation concept at the State Department, we can incentivize private investment, which will then provide great employment opportunities and jobs for Central Americans.
I think we need to grab to end this section of things. I could keep going with more questions. It will be really interesting, but thank you for your time. And also I want just to confirm again that as the Pulte Institute and as Notre Dame, we have this research alliance in Central America. And if somehow all the information and or research can help you to decide about your policies, we are more than open to share with you our perspective and the perspective of our partners in Central America as well. Thank you so much for the time, and I will pass the word for to María.
Hey, Clara, thank you for that offer, and I'd love to follow up with you on that. I think that'd be a great resource for Congress.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Congressman McCaul, for being with us today. We really appreciate your time, your compassion, your leadership. There are many things on your agenda with the Foreign Affairs Committee, and we really are honored and humbled that Central America makes it to the top of your list, given the challenges and the different parts of the world that your committee and you personally are focused on. So thank you again for your time and all of your bipartisan leadership on Central American policy.
What you're doing as well, and I appreciate you having me today.
Okay, take care. Thank you so much, sir.
All right, thank you.
We will now move on to the second part of our program, which is our panel discussion, which will follow up on many of the issues that we just discussed with the Congressman. Clara, thank you for your wonderful interview. So I now have the honor of introducing three colleagues from the Pulte Institute who will be making a presentation of their research, and then they'll be followed by our two prominent guests from the State Department and the Center for Strategic and International Studies. So our first presenter is Natalia María Ortiz Barrientos. She is a researcher with the Central American Institute of Social Sciences and Development in Guatemala. Her research focuses on migration, human rights, gender-based violence, governance, and transparency in collaboration with the United Nations, the International Organization for Migration, and the Inter-American Institute for Human Rights at the University of Notre Dame. She's also part of the Notre Dame Research Alliance in Central America. She will be followed by Dr. María Estela Rivero Fuentes. She is the Monitoring, Evaluation, Learning, and Knowledge Management Director for the USAID funded Supporting Holistic and Actionable Research in Education, the acronym is SHARE, program. A social demographer by trade, Estela has over 20 years of experience evaluating social programs, analyzing and collecting data, and conducting research on gender, migration, youth, and violence issues in Mexico, Central America, and the Caribbean. She has published 8 articles and a book chapter about migration. She holds a PhD in demography and public affairs from Princeton and a master's in demography from El Colegio de Mexico. And lastly, we have Thomas Hare, who is the senior associate with the Pulte Institute. He develops, implements, and evaluates international development programs with a focus on rule of law and human rights in Central America. His experience in design, implementation, and evaluation of international development programs includes work funded by the Department of State, USAID, the United Nations, and corporations and private donors. Tom is the author of a book on the challenge of creating safe neighborhoods in Central America, as well as several peer-reviewed book chapters and articles. So as you can see, a very distinguished group of experts with Central American expertise they will share with us. So I'm going to start with Natalia to begin the presentation from our panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Maura. Well, the Central America Institute of Social Sciences and Development, or INSEDES, has been collaborating with the Pulte Institute at Notre Dame for almost 5 years, now as a part of national and regional working groups on human rights and migration research. Over the past 4 years, INSEDES has conducted over 20 focus groups and interviews in different studies on these topics, as well as contributed to the Notre Dame Working Group's regional report on migration and a specific report on human rights and migration in the COVID-19 pandemic context. All of these resources are available in the event page for today. Next slide, please. Given the limited time I have, I want to focus my remarks on 2 structural issues that are trends that we have been noticing in our research. First is the economic dependence of remittances, and second is the challenges of reinserting returned migrants into society. As you can see from these charts, roughly between 15 and 20% of the region's GDP depends on remittances. That means that 1 of every $5 comes from outside the region. And depending on the country, that can mean up to $379 per month per person in remittances, which is the equivalent of a full-time minimum wage salary in Central America. And in Guatemala, we have found out that 6 out of 10 families depend on remittances. It's important to note that while it appears that remittances stayed stable in 2020, there was a 5-month period where remittances were nearly cut off. This was due to the economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and the loss of jobs in countries of destinations of Central American migrants, mainly in the US. Even in normal years, sending and receiving of remittances, it's not a stable process, especially for those who do not have legal work authorization in the US, and most especially for those who are deported back to Guatemala and other Central American countries. In our focus groups and an interview with returned migrants and interviews with those that provide services to returned migrants, we have learned of the importance of generating protocols that can guarantee their economic and social integration into their home countries. Next slide, please. So while it is important to immediately replace that 20% of GDP in the short term, there are a couple of things that can be done to help stabilize it in the long term. First, there are existing temporary worker programs that can be expanded for Central Americans. In 2020, only 5,000 Central Americans were granted the opportunity to travel and work to the United States, compared to the 240,000 visas granted to Mexicans. We have learned through research that people will take advantage of these kind of programs and do it in other countries, such as example of Central Americans who have traveled to Canada as temporary or agricultural workers for many years. And these experiences are moving labor ministries in Central America into actions toward expanding their temporary worker programs. And more recently, the Department of Homeland Security said in a statement that they will set 6,000 guest seasonal worker visas for people from Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras in the upcoming months. This is an important step toward alternative, safe, and regular migration mobility to different destinations, mainly the US. And second, through interviews with official and return migrants, we have learned that the support and employment opportunities for those who are deported could be improved. So it is important to point out that the implementation of national programs that facilitate labor qualification processes of their skills acquired abroad, as well as access to employment opportunities through the national employment systems, can be improved through the coordinating efforts with national governments, private sector, and job training institutions in Central America. All of these accompanied by national labor and salary policies that can guarantee access to decent employment conditions in the region. To conclude, while there are structural issues that lead to despair, regarding some of the remarks Senator McCaul said, and also my colleague Clara, when we consider the vast economic challenges involved, there are several practical solutions that could be implemented or improved upon to take advantage of the skills and abilities of Central American workers here in the region. Thank you, and I will now pass it on to my colleague Estela to continue.
Thank you. Next slide, please. Good afternoon. The evidence I will show comes from the performance evaluation of a USAID-funded workforce development program in Honduras that the Pulte Institute conducted over the past 4 years. Aimed at at-risk youth in high-crime neighborhoods, which is one of the groups with highest probabilities of migrating, the program sought to increase income-generating opportunities for them. It provided 3 types of services: general employment skills training, cognitive behavioral therapy, and mentorship that help build life skills, resilience, and emotional coping mechanisms, and links to specific job opportunities. The results I show here demonstrate that the combination of these services has a positive result and helps youth flourish and consequently lower their migration intentions. The box you see in the left shows the migration intentions of a typical high-risk individual in this group, right at the beginning of the program. There are 4 individuals in this box because they are all identical except for their employment condition and level of resilience, which measures how resourced an individual is in their community and sense of support. From this box, we notice that at the beginning of the program, individuals in this particular group who were unemployed were more likely to have migration intentions than those who were unemployed. In the in-depth interviews we conducted for this evaluation, we found some of these participants were self-employed or in very unstable and badly paid jobs when they entered the program. Most of them accepted these jobs because they were their only option. In both cases, that is, employed and unemployed, individuals with high resilience have lower migration intentions than individuals with low resilience. The effect of high resilience in the case of those unemployed is highly significant, and it decreases by 2/3 migration intentions in this group. This means that some individuals may see immigration as the only way to improve their situation, while their more resource counterparts may have sufficient support to come to cope with adverse experiences such as unemployment or underemployment, thereby reducing the drive to emigrate. The box on the right shows the emigration intentions for the same group of individuals 6 months after the program ended. By this time, the difference between those who were employed and those who were unemployed almost disappeared. Furthermore, over time, we found an increase in migration intentions among those who were unemployed and a decrease in migration intentions among those who were employed. Resilience slightly decreases migration intentions in both cases. Next, please. What do these results mean for policy and scaling the program? One of the US government's strategic objectives in the region is the development of youth, so that they can capitalize on their capabilities at home without the need to migrate. The following recommendations apply to workforce development programs similar to the one we evaluated, which are one of the key investments in the strategy. Indeed, USAID is considering scaling up the workforce development program that we evaluated, or similar programs from 7,500 individuals to 50,000 individuals in Honduras over the next 5 years. The following recommendations may seem obvious, but there is a measure of precision needed to ensure a better return on investment. The first recommendation is to continue investing in interventions that seek to strengthen individual resilience, community and peer support, and other psycho-emotional protective factors. Our results indicate that individuals who have higher resilience are better able to face unemployment in a dignified manner, and that they are less likely to have migration intentions. The second recommendation is to continue investing in workforce development programs that seek to build employment skills. These may be predictable, but not less important. It is necessary to embed workforce development interventions in a development project that prioritizes job creation. The last point I want to make is that this training necessarily needs to be linked to employment opportunities. And these need to be decent, long-term jobs. This is particularly important in context of high underemployment where job rotation is frequent. Our results show that when training does not result in employment in the medium term, it causes frustration and has unintended consequences, such as increased migration. Not even strengthened resilience can help decrease this. With that, I close. I look forward to your comments and pass it on to my colleague, Tom.
Thanks, Estela. I'll speak briefly to one of the other commonly referenced root causes of migration, namely violence, and then attempt to tie our discussion together a bit more. Next slide, please. As is well known, violence in the region is endemic. Honduras and El Salvador routinely rank near the top of the global list of homicide rates, and Guatemala is above average for the Americas. This violence is often referenced by migrants or would-be migrants in our research, and research by others, as one of the primary reasons for leaving. For some time now, USAID and others have approached violence prevention using the social ecological model, where it's helpful to think of the various potential risk and protective factors involved in violence at multiple interacting levels: individual, relationship, community, and societal. For example, interventions to increase protective factors at the individual level include things like cognitive behavioral therapy, life skills training, and mentorship, while interventions at the community level seek to promote greater cohesion through things like establishing neighborhood associations, after-school programs, neighborhood beautification, and so on. I will focus on the individual level and refer back to this model as it is instructive for our discussion on migration as well. Next slide. As part of our work evaluating violence prevention programs in Honduras, and through our collaboration with Catholic Relief Services and the University of Central America in El Salvador, we explored what happens at the individual level that might serve as protective factors for violence involvement, either as a victim or a perpetrator. We did this both among youth in general and those in jail. Here I show the results for youth in the general population as an example. As we can see at the bottom in the left, individual resilience has an asterisk, indicating that the association with violence involvement is statistically significant, or that we can say with great confidence that as resilience goes up, violence involvement goes down. This means that there is support for the idea that an increase in the extent to which an individual is able to navigate to resources in order to cope with the challenges, or resilience, is associated with a decrease in violence involvement. And this association with violence is even stronger than other common protective or risk factors. For many of the youth that we interviewed in depth, we learned that the mere fact that an adult from a program was taking the time to get to know them and their reality made a difference in their outlook and provided one more resource for them to turn to. In other words, the program increased their resilience, dignity, and sense of agency. So we saw the complexity and nuance of the situation in Estela's discussion, where coping mechanisms such as resilience and dignity of work matter in migration intentions. We see here where resilience again plays a role in mitigating another root cause of migration. By digging below the root causes, we are able to see individual characteristics and close relationships that play an important role in migration intentions and violence involvement. Through the various programs we have mentioned, the development community is learning more about how to promote things like resilience, namely through programs that support and build positive relationships, empower self-determination, and develop a sense of belonging among youth. Next slide. So what should we do to promote the conditions so that Central Americans can flourish at home? And how can policies and programs replicate this individual level flourishing in the short and the long term? I would propose that we use the social ecological model as a more holistic and inclusive framework for understanding migration intentions, rather than discussions of root causes alone. Specifically, our research suggests that we need to focus on the individual and societal levels more closely. First, at the individual level, the programs we have evaluated provide assistance and tools to youth through cognitive behavioral therapy, life skills training, mentorship, connection to quality employment, to build the resources or navigate to the resources that they need. In short, our research shows that these programs work. For those that find work through these programs, the work is often better than what they might have had previously in terms of pay, hours, stability, or location. And this offers a chance not only for increased income, but for increased dignity of work that in turn contributes to flourishing. In violence prevention programs, similar interventions reduce risk of violence involvement and risk of migrating. USAID is currently working to bring programs that build resilience and other soft skills to scale, as Estela mentioned, through the collaboration with local NGOs and government agencies. I'm hopeful that the current budget proposals will continue to support this expansion and take into account the types of nuances that Estela also mentioned. However, we also saw the scale of the challenge at the societal level in Nati's discussion, where replacing 20% of GDP is no small feat. From our work together with partners at the Universidad Tecnológica in Pulte in Honduras, we estimate that the past partnership between the US, the Inter-American Development Bank, and regional governments in the Alliance for Prosperity represented a $19 billion investment from 2016 to 2020. Now, most of that was not new funding, and some was not even allocated in the end. But even if it were, it is notable that a $5 that 5-year investment would not even replace 1 year of remittances to the region. So I would argue that at the societal level, we must work to create the conditions for individual flourishing that can combat structural hopelessness that arises from such dire realities. Hope or hopelessness are terms that are repeated often in our working group meetings with NGO and university partners in the region regarding those with migration intentions. So the challenge is immense. This structural hopelessness arises from a lack of agency to be able to do anything about the combination of the economic situation and governance issues, such as a lack of accountability, endemic corruption, poor services, and impunity that we've seen over the past decades. For many, migration provides the only hope. However, addressing these structural and societal issues that increase hopelessness is nothing new. Much of the Alliance for Prosperity and the Central America Regional Security Initiative focused on these topics over the past 15 years, and there were bright spots that did provide hope, namely the success of the CSIC and MAXI anti-corruption commissions in Guatemala and Honduras, before they were both closed, unfortunately. These long-term quasi-international efforts to combat corruption can and should be replicated and supported, potentially even at a regional level, by the US and other cooperators as a precondition for aid that goes directly to regional governments. This, combined with work at the individual level to provide quality employment and reduce violence, will start to foster hope by increasing a sense of agency and dignity. So to close, while the first two responses to why did you migrate or why do you plan to migrate are inevitably violence and a lack of employment, we need to advance our thinking from these proximate causes to another level of root cause, individual dignity and agency. A holistic approach can address these. Practically speaking, out of all the things the United States, regional governments, and civil society can do, one of the most important is to continue to build individual resilience that increases this dignity and agency. I believe our challenge for the next decade is to do that consistently, even when the current and future increases in migration subside, and to continue to monitor and measure our results for continued improvement. Thank you, and I look forward to our discussion. I'll now turn it back over to Maura.
Hi, thank you, Tom, and Natalia and Estela for that wonderful presentation. It's now my honor to bring into the conversation and expand upon what's been discussed so far, two very prominent policy experts who will offer their reflections on the discussion and some insights from their respective vantage points. First, we have Katherine Dueholm. She's the Acting Deputy Assistant Secretary for Mexico and Central America at the U.S. Department of State. She's held several other senior positions, including Director for Mexican Affairs, Director for Caribbean Affairs, and Director for Regional Affairs in the Legislative Affairs Bureau at the State Department. We also have Dan Rundy with us. He has 3 titles at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. He's the Senior Vice President, he's the William Schreier Chair, and the Director of the Project on Prosperity and Development. He also has had senior leadership roles at the International Finance Corporation and was Director of the Office of Global Development Alliances at USAID. So I'll start with you, Ms. Dueholm, for your overall reflections on the presentation today from our researchers regarding personal resilience, skills training, and workforce development, those types of programming. From your perspective, is that a worthwhile investment moving forward? And from what you see at this stage in the Biden administration, what kinds of policies will you be engaged with in Central America from your office?
Great, thank you very much, Maura, and thanks so much to the Keough Institute and to Pulte. We really are thrilled that you all are taking a serious look at this question, and kudos and many thanks to Natalia and to Estela and to Tom for some really very thoughtful work that we've taken great note of, and I made a lot of notes as you were going through and really appreciate that input and the work that went into it. We are very much aligned, frankly, with what you're seeing. We have given a lot of thought and been doing a lot of consultation as we seek to address this very difficult issue. We're actually in agreement with Representative McCaul on a lot of issues, not the least of which is that the citizens of Central America deserve better. And we also need to have an orderly migration system here in the United States. So on February the 2nd, President Biden issued an executive order that set forth his vision towards how we would approach migration. And it had two primary components. It's a comprehensive effort to make sure that we are looking at the whole of the migration challenge. So not just looking at what's happening at the border and not just looking at the root causes, but looking at the issue in its entirety. So the US government is producing right now a comprehensive migration strategy, and that is one line of effort to try and address what we can do to manage the current migration issues. And separately, but in tandem, we are looking at how we address the root causes of migration. And that's the effort that I'm most intensely engaged in, and I'm glad to have the chance to talk about some here today. It's really a complex issue. It is an issue that has developed over years and will take years to address. We very much want to make sure that we are looking at the entirety of what's causing people to desire to leave their homes to make their futures. And we agree with your researchers that there are ways that we can do that and help people flourish in Central America. And we are very much determined to do what the US government can do to make that happen. I would note that we are mindful that the US government cannot do this alone, and that it very much has to involve the governments and the people of Central America. And as was noted earlier, this is not the first time we have tried to address the root causes of migration. So we're really starting by trying to learn the lessons of past efforts. And we are consulting very widely. And so this interaction is very well timed. We are reaching out to people throughout society in Central America, as well as experts back here. And so we are looking to collect as much wisdom as we can to work with all of those with the will and the skill to contribute to this. We very much need people who have studied the issue as you have to help inform a really holistic approach. We are looking at this primarily through three central areas of focus, and you honed very much in on these in your presentations. And one is economic opportunities. That's clearly a key driver of migration, and we want to make sure that people have the kinds of economic opportunities that allow them to envision their futures in their home countries. We're also looking at security, as you touched upon as well. That is certainly a pivotal issue as well. So we are looking at what can we do to work with the governments and the people of Central America to address security concerns. But another one that's really critical is looking at governance and transparency. And that's really looking at the structure of how the governments are set up, making sure that there is transparency and truthfully getting at the corruption angle. If we don't get the corruption angle right, none of the other efforts are going to succeed, because it really erodes all of what we try and do in these other areas. So that's a primary focus for us moving forward, is how do we get at these corruption issues? And certainly CSIG and MOXIE were really good efforts in that direction, and we share your disappointment that those are no longer around, and we'll look to see what types of options there are to address the corruption issue. But that is certainly front and center for us going forward. We'll be looking at how we get to at-risk populations, what we can do to make sure that those who have not been traditionally represented in efforts are included, and looking at at-risk youth, looking really at addressing the situation of women in these countries and gender-based violence, as well as looking at indigenous groups and groups such as LGBTI+ and others. How do we help make sure that everyone enjoys a place in society? And we have a couple of major cross-cutting issues. We're trying to look at how can we use technology to get at some of these challenges? How can we be as efficient as possible? How can we use the new tools we have at our disposal? As well as trying to combat some cross-cutting challenges such as climate change. When we look at the dry corridor in the region that is creating food insecurity and losses for farmers, that's a major challenge, as well as flooding and hurricanes such as we just saw in the past year. We've got a lot of challenges with this region, not only the pre-existing conditions that challenged the ability of people to stay in their countries and flourish, but it's also compounded now by the COVID-19 pandemic and 2 successive hurricanes. So we've got major challenges in front of us. Expertise like yours will certainly help us in moving forward, and I thank you very much for your effort in helping to inform how we might best proceed from a policy perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Katherine. I want to bring Dan into the conversation and pull together some of the things that have been discussed so far. Congressman McCaul specifically mentioned in terms of economic assistance or activities that the U.S. could direct to the region. He mentioned the Development Finance Corporation, which, Dan, I know you were instrumental in standing up that agency through the BUILD Act legislation. So you know quite a lot about DFC, and also the Export-Import Bank, and you are on one of their advisory committees. So he brought up those 2 agencies as a particular mechanisms for U.S. engagement on the economic front. And then we also had Natalia mention the remittances and just the basic economic reality of how much of the GDP the remittances currently occupy. So if you could just kind of tackle some of these larger economic issues and how effective you really think the U.S. can be on that front with Ex-Im Bank, the DFC, or any other strategies that you're aware of.
Maura, thanks for having me. I want to first congratulate the Keough School and the Pulte Institute for convening this. This is great. And I really think it's important that the University of Notre Dame continues to do work like this. You have unique convening power, leveraging your research and your convening power, but also seeking to speak to the higher angels of our nature. I'm a practicing Catholic, and so if you invite me, I'm going to say yes. And you saw that Congressman McCaul said the same thing. So I think you all have a unique ability to bring people together across the political spectrum, and we need institutions like the University of Notre Dame to help us do that right now. And I think there's a big opportunity, I think, reflecting much of the research that the really excellent research that the 3 researchers presented just earlier, that there is a real opportunity to leverage research and there's a bipartisan opportunity to make some significant changes and support Central America. I think President Biden's the best prepared president in American history to take on the challenges in the Western Hemisphere, and in particular in Central America. But when President Biden was Vice President Biden, he made 8 trips to Central America, and he made 8 additional trips to the region as Vice President. We're very, very fortunate to have someone with that kind of investment of focus and attention on the region. So I think, and I also think, as you saw from Congressman McCaul, there's some opportunities for some bipartisan cooperation. Yes, I think issues such as leveraging the Development Finance Corporation or the U.S. Ex-Im Bank, the Trade and Development Agency, all agencies Congressman McCaul mentioned, as well as, frankly, the central role of USAID. These are really important institutions. I would just say that one of the things we need to be thinking about is we need to think about the end in mind. The goal ought to be to get to $8,000 per capita. Guatemala has $4,000 per capita. El Salvador is about $4,000 per capita, and Honduras is at $2,500 per capita. Research, like the really high quality research being done at the Pulte Institute, but in other institutions around the world, will tell you that the magic number is $8,000 per capita. When a society hits $8,000 per capita, people, for the most part, stop moving. That's not the only reason people move. I think it's important to reference citizen insecurity, not feeling bought into a society, feeling like it's very corrupt, or not feeling like they're being paid attention to, or like the government's not meeting their needs, like there's an absence of a state is often sort of the term we use, where if there's not cops or teachers or hospitals or roads or electricity, that's a problem. And there are some parts of these three countries where there's an absence of, there's limited state presence. That's the fancy term for that. So I think that there is a door open. I think the approach that the Obama administration took, which is called the Alliance for Prosperity that has been referenced here, was a great approach in partnership with the Inter-American Development Bank, which is the best vehicle for collective action in the region. I do think that one of the things we could do better, so I think there's two things. I think you're going to see a lot of attention on anti-corruption work. We've talked about the Engel list and I think the Biden administration is very focused on this, but also trying to deal with issues such as citizen security and violence issues. It's really critical. But also the second thing I want to re-emphasize is related to the DFC and the Exim Bank and U.S. Trade and Development Agency is leveraging the power of the private sector. The best social program in the world is a job. And so there are some really interesting initiatives that have been formed recently. There's someone involved with Notre Dame who has a number of kids who have gone to Notre Dame. Dr. Juan Jose Dabou was the former finance minister of El Salvador. He has started something called with a number of prominent business leaders from Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador. It's called Honduras, United States, Guatemala, El Salvador. Huge is an initiative of business leaders. So I think looking for investment opportunities, leveraging the DFC, leveraging the Exim Bank, those are important things. And so bringing together the private sector. I think the United States has a convening power to do this. And I think working in partnership with the Inter-American Development Bank. And so I'll just say one other thing, which is that we have some interlocutors on the other side of the table in the political side in El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras that are kind of uneven. And so we may have to find other partners. Sometimes it'll be business leaders. Sometimes it might be mayors. Sometimes it's going to be religious leaders. Sometimes it's going to be civil society leaders. Sometimes it's going to be at the cabinet level. But we need to find those partners we can work with to bring change about. But change is going to take a while. It's going to take a long time. So I think what you all are doing at the Pulte Institute and the Keough School is really, really important, bringing us together, leveraging this research, because there's an open door right now. And we have a really unique, there's a wonderful opportunity. It's the best opportunity we've had in at least 5 years on Central America, really maybe in the last 10. And so I'm very optimistic. So I think convening this was very, very timely, Maura. So I'll stop there.
Great. Thank you so much, Dan. I'm building off of some of the questions that came in from the RSVPs and just want to circle back to you for a moment, Katherine. In terms of the Vice President Harris being assigned a prominent role by the President to address the root causes of migration from Central America. And then also, of course, we have Mr. Zuniga, the Special Envoy to the region. I'm just wondering from your vantage point and building off of something Clara asked the Congressman, how does this all get coordinated? There may be different motivations as to why a lot of American policymakers are looking at Central America, but regardless of their intentions, there's all this attention, possibly an influx of new funding, the Vice President, the Special Envoy, private sector, which I do want to follow up on that with a question that came in. But Katherine, how do you see that? You're at the State Department in a particular office where you may have the chance to see how these dots can connect or should connect. Can you give some insights to that as we all try to hope for the best with all of this energy and focus on Central America?
Yeah, thank you, Maura. I think hoping for the best is always good, and hopefully we will be able to get the best. I think that's part of what we're trying to do with this really intense focus that's being brought to this issue set. And I think that having the Vice President leading this really gives you a sense of the dedication that the administration is bringing to this. And to Dan's point, the real intention to genuinely address these challenges. So she's taking a leadership role overall. Her team is very engaged throughout the interagency, helping to support her role in that regard. And all of the U.S. interagency is working to help support that effort. So we are very much coordinating, not just through the State Department, where Special Envoy Zuniga is located, and my office, we see him every day. We're in meetings constantly with him, including reaching out to numbers of people. IDB we just met with earlier this morning. I think that Dan may have a mole in here because we also met with Huge and others. So lots of those same kind of people that we're talking with, and very much a directed policy diplomatic approach that we're working on through the State Department, which feeds into this broader interagency effort that includes Treasury, includes DHS, includes USAID, and really the entire range of US agencies. So Special Envoy Zuniga is leading us from the diplomatic side. We are feeding up into the Vice President's office, and she's directing the overall effort, if that answers the question.
Great. And now we just need Congress to somehow be at the table constructively, and it's all going to work smoothly. But that's very, very helpful to get a sense of that type of collaboration. One question I'll ask either one of you to comment on that came in from one of our registrants is what types of big corporations and financial institutions are behind the scenes in terms of social instability in the region? So the private sector actors that may not be constructive, and how that the US government may be able to have some transparency, some insight there, which also kind of gets us into this issue of corruption, which you both mentioned as being a top concern. Any likelihood that some of those anti-corruption efforts that have been mentioned as having been successful, do either of you see any real movement towards that? Or is it just a talking point at this point in Washington?
I just think when I think about, I think there's a really good team being formed in the administration. So I'm very optimistic. I think there's been some really excellent appointments made, and I'm very excited about the Assistant Secretary Designate for Western Hemisphere Affairs. So I'd start with that. I would say that in terms of private enterprise, what you want is to have a formal private sector. What you want are folks paying taxes and obeying laws. And so in these three countries, oftentimes you have a number of there have been some folks who don't pay taxes. Some of the lowest tax collections in the world are in those three countries. There have been some improvements. El Salvador, I think, has a higher level of tax collection than, say, Guatemala. But oftentimes this is a function of companies and individuals saying, well, if I pay taxes, is that money actually going to go to something, or is it going to go get wasted? And so you have this concept of tax solidarity. So I would argue that the folks that are not paying taxes are sort of, if they're not paying what they're supposed to be paying, that's a problem. But I would say that there are a lot of very constructive actors. I mean, if I look at, say, Walmart, for example, I think they have something like 60,000 employees on the books who, I'm sure Walmart's one of the top 10 taxpayers in each of those three countries. I think they have something like 60,000 employees on the books. These are countries with high levels of what are called informality. Informality is not a good thing. Informality means if you got 60, 70% of your economy is in the informal sector, means people aren't being treated by labor laws, aren't being respected. There's probably a lot of corruption going on. Environmental rules aren't being respected, and it's very hard to get a bank loan. So I would argue it's actually the folks who are operating in the informal sector, not participating in the formal economy, or not paying their taxes. That's the big problem in terms of this issue is sort of where, and then I think that business has a very important constructive role to play. Oftentimes there are many responsible local business people. Those are the folks who live in those countries. Those are people who make the long-term investments, but everyone's got to play by the same set of rules. So I do think issues about rule of law, and so dealing with corruption issues, of course, is very, very important. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, and if I could just to kick it back to you, Katherine, but build off of what Dan just said, it seems like the U.S., on this particular topic, on one extreme, there's temporary, and this is something that Natalia mentioned also, there are, temporary worker visas, the H-2A, H-2B, and whether or not the U.S. government could increase those visas to create temporary jobs, primarily agricultural jobs in the U.S. However, kind of at the other end of the spectrum is what Dan was just outlining, which is, well, no, wait a minute, let's get folks out of the informal sector. What can the U.S. do quickly, possibly directly with U.S. corporations, to get folks out of the informal sector and actually into real jobs that pay taxes? And how do those two approaches, how are those balanced from your vantage point?
Yeah, thanks. So as I mentioned, we do have two different strategies we're working on. One is the comprehensive migration strategy and the other is root causes. The comprehensive migration strategy is looking at ways to find and expand legal pathways, of which things like H-2 visas are a part. And your presenters noted that we do have the announcement of 6,000 new visas that'll be set aside or put forward for workers from this region. So we are looking to provide those pathways for those who need and desire them, but we primarily want to create the conditions for people to be able to stay and seek their fortunes in their home countries. As we do that, I agree completely that getting more jobs and people into the formal sector is key. We've seen that roughly 60 people who are in the formal sector are 66% less likely to seek to migrate than those in the informal sector. So getting that formal sector expanded and moving people into there from the informal sector is key. So we are definitely looking to try and create the kind of conditions that will contribute to that. And what that really gets at is a business environment that facilitates the establishment of new businesses for small and medium-sized enterprises and the investment from larger enterprises to come in and be able to set up companies. And you really have to have strong rule of law, but you also have to have efficient processing. You have to have business-friendly environments to allow that to happen. And just to touch briefly on your prior point, Maura, I agreed with everything that Dan said, and I would add to that you know, anytime you try and get at an issue set, there are going to be some who are going to be disadvantaged by what you seek to do, particularly with an anti-corruption agenda. So, you know, we're not naive to the fact that there will be some who will see that as going against their interest, and we will just have to work to create the conditions where we have strong partners, and a lot of these companies that see big markets and big potential and opportunities to create more jobs for people are great allies in that effort.
Great, and I'm going to ask one more question of both of you. In the time we have remaining, it's going to be a combined question, so I could try to get in as much as possible from our folks who registered. One question that came in is, how do you keep money, how do you keep government money, I guess U.S. money given to these countries from getting into the hands of the military? And that gets to, I think, this topic we've certainly been touching on at various parts of this conversation, about literally the channels of connection, the following the money from the U.S. to governments versus nonprofits, different partners, the multinational entities and actors that we could work with. And either of you having some insights there, which I know brings us right into politics and tracking those politics, the different actors at a given time in any of the countries that we're discussing. What are the mechanisms that either of you have seen to be really effective so that we all want, of course, U.S. taxpayer dollars to get into the right hands, but for those of us who don't necessarily know exactly what that looks like inside the government, can either of you explain that a little bit for us?
Yeah, thank you. I think the primary thing to understand is that most of our assistance does not go directly to governments. The vast majority of our assistance goes to implementing partners in the region. Sometimes that's through partners that we have in the US who work through local partners on the ground, and sometimes it's directly to on the ground partners such as civil society organizations and other partners like that who will take on some of the assistance and work with us to help implement it. That is the vast majority of what we do. And so that's really our best way of making sure that we don't have our funds subject to leaders who might not have the best of intentions with US funds, and we help protect them through there and have robust monitoring mechanisms. through USAID and the other parts of the US government, including the State Department, that provide funding for these efforts.
So thanks, Maura. That's a really interesting question. Let me just make a couple of points. One is that if you look at those three countries of Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador, and you look at even with the doubling of foreign aid, which I applaud and I'm in favor of, it will be about less than 2% of the GNP of the countries. If you looked at those previous slides that one of your researchers was talking about as a percentages of GNP, remittances is a much bigger number. Foreign aid is a catalyst. It's an important jump starter. It's a way of, it's money that no one else will invest in certain things. Remittances will go to certain things and foreign aid goes to other kinds of things. So it's important money, but it's not, so when people think about this, we think it could be 10% or 15% of the GNP of a country. It's not, it's really important money, but we have to have some humility about sort of the size of this, but it's really critical. The second thing is I agree with Katherine about that a lot of these monies are channeled through civil society, through a variety of other instruments, as Katherine was saying. I do want to say something else, though. I think it's very important to understand that we need to have responsible police, responsible judges. We need responsible military that respects human rights. And so I know that there's been a complicated history in Latin America and in Central America around those issues. At the same time, these three societies are having to confront armed criminal gangs financed by our illicit drug consumption. They are the victims in some ways of our illicit drug consumption that fuel really super bad actors. And I really applaud Congressman McCaul mentioning the fact that we created all these gangs in Central America, unfortunately, are an American creation. So I don't disagree with deporting criminals, but we said we'll deport criminals. We sent a lot of hardened criminals who've gone to sort of the Harvard University of criminal schools in some of our jails, and they set up shop in these countries and have leveraged that. So we need police. And so one of the reasons, and so, I have 3 children, and one of my wife's from Argentina. So when I saw those kids in 2014 coming on our border, some of them looked like my kids. And I asked myself, like, what would prompt me to put my kids on that 1,000-mile train, and put their lives in danger and have all sorts of terrible things happen to them. And my conclusion was that there was a sense of citizen insecurity and a sense of terrible acts of like proximity to violence, in addition to sort of the issues we've talked about of governance and not being brought into a society, corruption, weak governance, and jobs is just feeling like, so we need a responsible police force. We need a responsible military. And so I personally think we need to, in a responsible way, partner and help make sure that, people feel like that the police are their friends as opposed to not, or the military is a responsible actor. And one hopes and want to work towards that. So I think that's important just to underscore.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Dan. And we could definitely keep going longer because I have many more questions for both of you, and also would have loved to have been able to bring our panelists back in, but we have run out of time. I want to thank you all so much. The research that was presented today is obviously just a capstone of a lot of work that's been going on for years, and we do hope, certainly we'll circle back with Congressman McCaul's office and certainly with both of you and your very important work at the State Department as well as at CSIS. If that research can be of assistance, we'd love to continue the conversation and partner together. And today's conversation really is what we at the Keough School continue to try to do, to be engaged in some of these key global issues, to connect with Congress, somebody of particular prominence, Congressman McCaul and his tremendous leadership on Central America, as well as Katherine, you're right at the center of so much of this at the State Department, and your insights were extremely helpful for us, for our audience today, to really learn more about how this all works beyond what we can read in the newspapers. And Dan, your expertise is so deep and so broad. CSIS is lucky to have you, and we're lucky to have had some of your time today. So thank you all so much for participating, and we'll have a recording of this event available that will circulate as well. And there'll be more on this conversation. We definitely have a particular interest in the difficult challenges in Central America and hope that our research and ongoing conversations can contribute to some of the solutions.